there's Fraser Lake, Peterson's Beach. Apparently the pictographs are to the left, or east of Peterson's Beach.
First Nations pictographs are as elusive as they are mysterious. The impermanent nature of these drawings make them hard to find and often require special equipment to detect them. Born of the oral tradition, these paintings offer the only glimpse into some of the varied histories of the First Nations people. In Fraser Lake, BC, there are several examples of First Nations pictographs along the shore of Fraser Lake. I chose a particular set near my house to investigate and get some footage for this documentary. These particular pictographs are believed to have served a few different purposes. Craig Hooper noted that the pictographs we were looking for were either drawn by a shaman to act as a telepathic lookout for the village, and if any intruders crossed their path, the shaman would be alerted, or they were drawn by children on their vision quest to give the visions more power. This is a common theme among the different pictographs across the country. My hunt to find the local pictographs on Fraser Lake started with a rumor that led to a web search, which gave me a general location, which led me to ask a long-time local residents, whom by all accounts lived very near the pictographs, which ended with me being more confused and less certain of the location of the pictographs. Despite many people knowing about the pictographs on the shore of Fraser Lake, very few people had seen them. Even the directions to where they are located varied from person to person. If we are to consider the oral tradition these pictographs belong to, this could be accounted for by what Ong says of the oral tradition. A singer will protest that he can do his own version of a song verbatim 20 years from now, but when recorded and compared, they turn out to be never the same. The location of the pictographs only lives in the oral culture, and directions are not easily obtained. As Ong points out, a request for information is commonly interpreted interactively and is frequently parried. Always answer a question by asking another. When people were asked for the directions, they all responded with a question. Craig Hooper, a local amateur anthropologist, gave a general description of the area, and when asked more specifically, responded, "Do you know where John Ketlow's house is?" The pictographs are somewhere between Peterson's Beach and John's house. Failing to get directions by word of mouth, I consulted guidebooks and topographical maps. I had gathered all of the knowledge and directions I could find and set out with a group of friends on our kayaks. Not knowing exactly where we were heading or how long it would take, all we knew was the pictographs were east of Peterson's Beach and were on a rock face visible from the lake.
We are heading out to go try to find them. They're on a rock face. Apparently at low water like today, you can see more than what are usually exposed. So not the best day, but should be a good trip. So the journey begins. Check the coastline for the pictographs. So this is the first rock face we've seen since leaving Peterson's Beach, but it's below someone's house, so we're gonna get closer, take a look.
We set out in the direction given and paddled for about 5 kilometers. Most of the shore is dotted with beaches and summer cabins, but in the distance we could see a rock bluff jutting out into the lake. At this point the water began to get rougher and rougher as we approached the bluff. 2 friends landed on a beach and wait out the bad weather, and 2 of us carried on, determined to reach the rock face. As we got closer to the outcropping, my shock-resistant and waterproof camera mysteriously stopped working, showing nothing but green squiggly lines. The winds got stronger and the waves became whitecaps. My last companion turned back, but I persevered. Still not seeing the pictographs, I pushed on, and as I rounded the corner of the rock face, and just as I lost sight of my companions, the waves began swamping my kayak. I decided it was too dangerous to continue and I turned back. I was too late. The waves were crashing against the rock face and I struggled to turn. My kayak was flipped over and I was dashed against the rocks. Luckily there was a tiny beach at the base of the cliff, and I was able to take shelter and drain my kayak. At this point the waves had become extremely violent and it was getting difficult to even stand on the narrow strip of shore I landed on. It was around 11 degrees and very windy. I started to worry about hypothermia, as I started violently shivering. I surveyed the cliff to see if I could climb up and over, but I decided it was too wet and slippery. I decided the best course of action was to try calling my companions on my cell phone and let them know of my situation. As I was leaving a voicemail to the very friend I was calling, came around the same corner and shouted, "Hey Lorn!" Vince had found me. The water was not as rough further out in the lake, but was so single-minded in my determination to find the pictographs, I hadn't recognized the danger of getting too close to the rocks. With my confidence re-established, I was able to fight my way out into the lake and paddle back to the nearest beach, and called my wife to come get us. In the end, we never even glimpsed the pictographs, or even knew if we were at the right rock face. They had eluded us. Were we being challenged by the spirits, or warded off by the shaman's power? I guess it would depend on who you asked about our experience. Penna states that limited writing includes both picture writing or pictography and ideography, the use of pictures to represent not the object drawn but some attribute or idea suggested by the object. For example, the use of a drawing of the sun to represent the idea of warmth. Limited writing refers directly to the object or idea portrayed. Pictograms or ideograms call to mind an image or concept that then may be expressed in language. The reader does not need to know the language of the writer, but can translate the signs directly into his or her own language. Pictographs are all considered sacred and were often drawn by shamans or adolescents on their coming-of-age spirit quests. The function of pictographs, or paintings on rocks, throughout the province is often unclear. They are frequently found in places with difficult access and have simple designs. The pictographs are often painted over one another. Some were probably created to record events and identify territory. Much of the art is thought to be the work of shamans attempting to influence the supernatural beings or of individuals on vision quests. The simplicity of design and the practice of painting one pictograph over another suggests that, at many rock art sites, the process rather than the final product was the most important aspect. The most commonly used red paint is created with a powdered hematite or red ochre, an anhydrous iron oxide, combined with burnt pitch from the tamarack tree. It was mixed with saliva into a paste, which is applied to the rock surface with the index finger or a small piece of buckskin. First, you take the stuff for the paint and heat it over the fire, then you put it in a stone bowl and grind it up. First Nations languages had no written form before the contact with the Europeans, meaning that anthropologists have had to rely on the oral traditions to study the First Nations history. The pictographs remain one of the only written accounts of life during this period. The First Nations culture relied on the oral tradition to keep their history and knowledge. York and others state that pictorial literacy is important to the formulation of ideas and concepts in the oral culture. These images can unite people from different languages by means of visual, cultural commonality. Such pictorial messages left on rocks are a baseline from which two more functionally specific activities could have evolved in human history, namely art and literacy. According to Snyder, the act of painting images on rocks would influence or bias certain ways of thinking over others. For example, First Nations, like many other cultures, relied on myths and the supernatural to explain the world around them. These myths are strongly connected with the pictographs found throughout Canada. Oftentimes, a perceived connection to mythological figures would determine a family's place or station in their community. The First Nations people were very spiritual, feeling a connection to the earth and everything that inhabits it. Their belief system often led to the creation of the pictographs. They were a representation of the power that exists in the world around them, and it showed the reverence to that power. These beliefs led to vision quests in search of guardian spirits to gain power and protection. Shamanism was an important aspect of their culture. A shaman was often ordained through birth, but sometimes there were other circumstances that led to someone becoming a shaman. These shamans were responsible for communicating with the spirits and securing success in wars or hunts. This was often done through the creation of pictographs. Much of the art is thought to be the work of shamans attempting to influence supernatural beings or of individuals on vision quests. There are many accounts of early European explorers coming across these pictographs and writing about them or sketching them in their journals. The First Nations' spiritual beliefs and the pictographs would have been difficult to reconcile with the Christian beliefs of the early explorers. Henry Rose Schoolcraft was the first non-First Nations person to begin to sketch and interpret the pictographs in Canada. The missionaries began to have a significant impact on the First Nations in the late 19th century. Christianity was at odds with the potlatch tradition, as the First Nations people were given mixed messages about the practice of gift-giving at the potlatches. By the 20th century, many First Nations were converted to Christianity. The decimation of the First Nations population, social structure, and traditional lifestyles were contributory to the acceptance of Christianity amongst the First Nations. This rapid decline in population, social structure, and traditional lifestyle caused by the rapid influx of European missionaries and settlers is likely how, as Muckle points out, the pictographs became shrouded in mystery and a relic of times past.